Let's finish this. Are you trying to make me angry? Time to die, Chris.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the 145th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring our patron pick for August 2023, Albert Wesker from the Resident Evil franchise. The enigma pulling the strings, the shadow behind every corner, the darkness surrounding all insidious endeavors. Albert Wesker is a constant presence in the world of Resident Evil, a man whose larger-than-life persona and insidious machinations dooms countless lives as he strives to fulfill all his nefarious ambitions. Now, typically I release the patron pick at the beginning of every month, but I needed more time to sift through everything there is about this expansive universe, as this franchise is exceedingly convoluted, and the various continuities that have been born out of an incredible amount of books, movies, animations, mangas, and video games is hard to keep track of, to say the least. Not to mention that a lot of information that can be found within any given continuity is often contradicted by something else within that continuity. So with that in mind, I wanted to examine Wesker in the most cohesive way that I possibly could, and for that reason, in this video, I chose only to include information that we can find in the Prime continuity, which encompasses all of the mainline games, a few extras like the Wesker reports, and the odd animation and manga here or there. Now, as I said, even within one continuity, you can find contradictory information. So for the sake of trying to establish a complete and streamlined narrative for this character, we're going to assume that all the dates that can be found within the History of Resident Evil file from Resident Evil 5 are accurate, and that all the information about Albert that can be found in the Albert Wesker file in the same game trumps all other information that might contradict it. Why I chose to base everything off of these two files is simple. Because Resident Evil 5 was the last game that Albert appeared in, and I imagine these files were meant to tie up any loose ends regarding his character that might have reared their ugly heads in the previous entries. We're still going to cover all the important things about Wesker's character that we can find in other games, but these files will serve as a baseline that I'll be referring back to as this video progresses. With all this in mind though, I'm bound to have missed something, or several somethings, so feel free to let me know about any missteps down below. Now, some of you might be disappointed that I didn't include Wesker as he appears in the films in this video, but after doing some research, I learned that these films weren't exactly well received, and the few Resident Evil fanatics that I've discussed this video with recommended that I just stick with the games this time around. However, if enough of you want to see the film version of Wesker in a video, I can release that video at some point in the future. Just let me know down below. But before we get started, let's first talk about our sponsor for this video, Babbel. Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the world. They offer a wide variety of comprehensive lessons that help you reach your language goals, and they offer perhaps the most crucial tool when it comes to achieving fluency: real-life conversations with native speakers. This is one of the greatest perks that comes with using Babbel, and it's easy to get started with daily lessons that will have you speaking a new language in only 3 weeks. Babbel offers a ton of languages to choose from, as well as several different subscription packages, like their lifetime subscription. So far, I've enjoyed improving my fluency in Spanish and French, but my partner is dead set on touring Italy in the future, and with Babbel, it's easy to get started on a new language that interests you.
Fare canottaggio.
Fare canottaggio.
Fare canottaggio. Sciare.
Sciare. Summer is here, and it's time to set off on that next adventure. And with Babbel at your fingertips, you can ensure that anywhere you'll go, you'll fit right in with the locals. So step up your travel game right now with Babbel by clicking the link down below, where you can get up to 60% off of your subscription. Again, that's up to 60% off of your subscription to Babbel by clicking the link down below. Thank you, Babbel, for sponsoring this video. Now, without further ado, let's begin. The story of Albert Wesker is intimately tied to the Umbrella Corporation, or more appropriately, its progenitor, the Spencer Foundation, and its founder Oswell E. Spencer. The Spencer Foundation, a charitable organization on the surface, was born from the dream of one man, Lord Oswell E. Spencer, a British aristocrat, virologist, and eugenicist. Lord Spencer was disgusted with the state of the world and what he believed to be the deplorable future it was marching towards, and he longed for a utopia comprised only of individuals who represented the pinnacle of humankind, a species unburdened by the malaise that we had slowly fostered over the long march of history that could set a course towards the unimaginable. And so Lord Oswell Spencer dreamt and fantasized about creating a perfect world filled with highly intellectual superhumans that he would create by inducing suitable candidates with viral infections, a world that he planned to one day rule over as a god. And like many power-hungry and self-righteous men with grand and sinister dreams, his thoughts eventually manifested into the very real attempt to make his dreams a reality. In his efforts to do so, Oswell created the Spencer Foundation, an organization that both provided cover for his research and served as a funnel with which he could covertly fund it. With these structures in place, the various researchers employed by the Spencer Foundation began testing a virus they had developed from the flowering plant Sonnentrep, or Stairway of the Sun, a sacred plant they had obtained from the Indapaya people that induced similar effects as the future T-virus in both suitable and unsuitable subjects. Spencer and his cohort sought to produce the same effects within people that the Indapaya myths that surrounded the plant claimed occurred in their kings of old, superhuman properties that they developed from the Sonnentrep that gave them their mandate to rule their people. But for such an ambitious eugenicist project like creating specifically selected superhumans, one needs suitable candidates to fulfill that purpose. Enter Project W, or Project Wesker, which was named after the man only known as Dr. Wesker, who served as its head. The goal of Project W was to continue the Spencer Foundation's ongoing research and testing of the virus the T-virus originated from, the aptly named progenitor virus, by using test subjects they'd recruited especially for this purpose via the selective screening of candidates based on their parents' intellect and contributions to mankind. However, this plan went even further than simply providing adequate guinea pigs for a virus. The children of the Wesker Project were slated to be secretly raised by the Foundation in remote locations. They were given the best educations and access to everything they would need to foster their minds and bodies, as well as strict conditioning and indoctrination into the values of the Spencer Foundation, so they might one day fulfill their purpose as willing agents of Lord Spencer. And this is how Albert Wesker became Albert Wesker, a man who was essentially born alongside the Spencer Foundation as a vessel with which Oswell could further realize his dreams. Now, I don't mean he was literally born due to the Foundation's influence directly through nefarious means, such as selective breeding or genetic engineering. As hideous as that idea is, such an origin would have been a much kinder beginning for the child now known as Albert Wesker. Albert, like all the other children who would bear the name of the original Dr. Wesker, were abducted from their parents, or perhaps they were adopted. I'm more inclined to believe they were abducted, as establishing extensive backgrounds on orphans seems like quite the task, so it would be much more practical, if not more difficult, for the Foundation to take children whose parents' achievements that they could definitively verify. Now, I think it's reasonable to assume that these children would have been taken from their parents before they were able to develop concrete memories of them. So with that in mind, I believe we can deduce that Albert and the other children were likely taken when they were either infants or toddlers. And for Albert in particular, this notion is supported by several details that were given throughout the series. In the second Wesker's report, we learn that Albert was 18 when he arrived at the Arclay Research Center in 1978, putting his birth date sometime in 1960. Using the History of Resident Evil file in Resident Evil 5, which states that the fifth head of the Ashford family, Edward Ashford, began his research into what would later become known as the progenitor virus around 1960, we can assume that the Spencer Foundation was also founded sometime in 1960, or shortly thereafter, as the same file states that in 1962, Lord Spencer was already putting his plans in motion by enlisting the architect George Trevor to design and construct a reclusive mansion on the outskirts of Raccoon City, which would indicate that the Foundation was established between these dates. Moreover, Albert seems to have no memory of his parents, which lends further credibility to the idea that he was taken when he was too young to remember who his parents were. And so, with an act of cruelty, the babe who would later be known as Albert Wesker began his life as a ward of the Spencer Foundation, a boy who, like the many that were taken alongside him, would one day count himself amongst a master race of superhumans that would lead the world into a glorious future. But before the promised day of their evolution arrived, his insidious caretakers first needed to perfect the virus that would enable the Wesker children to ascend alongside their patron god, Lord Oswell E. Spencer. Prior to the establishment of Project W, initial testing of the progenitor virus proved to be rather precarious. These preliminary trials achieved middling results, as though precious few of these first candidates showed signs of superintelligence upon being infected. More often than not, these test subjects succumbed to the virus, and the high mortality rate amongst subjects served as quite the barrier to Lord Spencer's nefarious dream. So considering his planet-sized ambitions and need for extensive and expensive research to be conducted on a bevy of candidates that would take years, if not decades, in order to more effectively achieve his goals, Lord Spencer needed to go global. And so began Umbrella Corp in the year 1968, the vehicle with which Lord Spencer could achieve his dreams. So, for many years after his kidnapping, Albert received the best albeit conditioned rearing, that money could buy. And though his eventual employment in Umbrella was planned from the start, the young and brilliant Albert Wesker believed that he desired to work for Umbrella, which he explains in Wesker's Report 1 and 2. When given the choice to be whoever he wanted to be, Albert chose Umbrella, and alongside his longtime friend and colleague William Birkin, he made great strides taking the progenitor virus to the next level with the T-virus, along the way conducting experiments on countless unfortunate souls alongside his colleagues, who endured years of torment in the name of their research. At this time in Wesker's life, he seems to have already been displaying some of the hallmarks of his personality, namely his eerily calm demeanor, callousness, selfishness, and sense of superiority. However, at this time in Wesker's life, there was something tugging at the corners of his mind that began pushing him towards his transformation into the monster he would become. Because as fulfilling as his research seemed to have been, Albert was ever curious about the mysterious head of his organization, Oswell E. Spencer, and by December of 1983, Albert's focus was centered more so on discovering Lord Spencer and Umbrella's secrets than it was on his research. At the same time, Albert became disillusioned with Oswell's plan, wondering why a man running a corporation wanted to create a virus that would annihilate nearly the entire population of Earth, and whether this was something he really wanted to be a part of. So around the time that William Birkin was advancing research on the T-virus into the G-virus stage, Wesker requested a transfer to the data and information section of Umbrella so he could continue to look into Lord Spencer's affairs. Unbeknownst to Albert, along with everything that occurred in his life so far, this was all a part of Oswell's plans, which we learn from a few more excerpts from Albert's file in 5. The Mansion Incident, the tragedy at Raccoon City, Rockford Island, Umbrella's Antarctic Research Facility, and the Umbrella Caucasus Research Facility in Russia. One man was involved either directly or indirectly with each and every one of these incidents: Albert Wesker. The motivation behind all of Wesker's actions can be found in this current incident in Africa. Wesker had already obtained samples of various organisms and viruses, including the T-virus, the G-virus, the T. veronica virus, and Las Plagas. All of these were eagerly and enthusiastically received by Umbrella's former rival companies, who compensated him greatly for each. With wealth, power, and glory, Wesker appeared to have everything a person could ever want. Wesker, however, was not interested in material gains. An all too familiar sense of trepidation continued to gnaw at him, the source of this uneasiness being Umbrella's founder, Oswell E. Spencer. There was a failsafe device attached to every Wesker, Spencer's existence. This was the discomfort Albert had felt throughout his life. All Wesker children were programmed to seek Spencer out, which manifested itself as a growing anxiety within each of the subjects. So, above all, Albert's main goal throughout this series was to both learn all he could about Umbrella and its leader, and undermine the company by working with its competitors. Prior to his meeting with Lord Spencer before he murdered him, that is. His betrayal of both Stars and Umbrella at the mansion was the beginning. The Tyrant was to be used as a leverage chip with rival corporations, giving Albert the resources he'd need to dismantle Umbrella from the outside, now that he'd done all he could from within. When this failed, the progenitor virus he was injected with by Birkin both kept him alive and hungry for revenge against Stars. With his ambitions revealed and a new power bristling under his skin, Albert now seemingly worked with and for everyone. But each person and organization that came into contact with him were only ever being used to further Albert's goal of one day reaching the elusive Lord Spencer. Ada Wong, the Ashfords, Colonel Vladimir, Lord Sadler, and Los Illuminados. These individuals and their organizations were only ever allowed to work with or were targeted by Albert so he could acquire the G-virus, T. veronica virus, the UMF-013 supercomputer, and Las Plagas respectively. So, Albert worked with what he knew best, the viruses that had been a part of much of his adult life. And through all of these endeavors, Albert has never showed himself to be anything more than an utterly vile individual. Snide, haughty, and brutal, Wesker shows himself to be highly skilled in everything he does, and his heightened natural intelligence ensures that he accomplishes nearly everything he sets his mind to. That isn't to say that Wesker is some unstoppable badass who's as stone cold and stalwart as death itself, as there are many times where we see Albert moving things from the shadows rather than putting himself in the middle of the action, and even when he does, there are a number of occasions where he would rather run than fight, though those instances could be seen as tactical retreats rather than acts of cowardice. No, Albert isn't a coward. In fact, most of the time Albert is cool, calculated, and eerily calm. the menace with the clean-cut persona hidden behind sunglasses, whose very presence screams danger and malice. Unless you can keep cool and still be decisive no matter what the circumstances, then success will always evade you. This is a remark that Albert makes in the second Wesker's report that gives us a bit of insight into why he conducts himself the way he does. And indeed, it's this ability to keep cool that has ensured much of his success. But for a man in Albert's position, one needs to be ruthless. He has no remorse, empathy, or code of any kind. What benefits Albert is what he follows, and if billions have to die in order for him to get what he wants, billions will die. That's the attitude that has carried Albert Wesker through all of the horrid things he's done. And it turns out, such an attitude was a crucial aspect of his character that he'd need to embody in order to assume his rightful place as the instrument of Lord Spencer's plan. When Albert met Lord Spencer and finally discovered the truth of his origins and the manufactured state of his life, he was at a critical point that could have ended in multiple different ways. He could have decided to artificially extend the life of his dying benefactor. He could have turned away from his evil ways and lived a life of luxury somewhere far away from the rest of the world. Maybe he could have even turned his efforts towards stopping all the misery that he'd helped to create by playing with these various corporations and the bioweapons at his disposal. But no, once Albert learned of Oswell's plans and his intentions to become a god, he decided that he should fulfill that plan, only instead of Oswell Spencer ruling over all, it would be Albert Wesker. And so ensued the culmination of decades of work by the Spencer Foundation, Umbrella, and Albert Wesker himself. The use of all the viral plagues that altered living organisms' minds and bodies to create a virus that could change the planet forever, the Ouroboros virus. With this virus, Albert planned to enact Spencer's plan with a slight variation. There would be no set chosen few specifically selected by Albert who would ascend to the heights of godhood once all their lessers had succumbed to the virus's effects. No, Albert planned to release this virus across the entire planet, with the intended result being the ascension of only those who possessed the same genes as the Indapaya kings of old. And without this vanguard group of anointed mutants, everything that would occur after this plague had spread to every corner of the earth would be left to natural selection. And from the ashes of a broken world would rise the true few who deserve to be led by their new god, Albert Wesker. 100 will give their lives so one may live. An accurate summation given to us by Albert at the end of the Resident Evil 4 remake that portends what awaits the world once Ouroboros is unleashed. However, Wesker wouldn't live long enough to reap the fruits of his decades-long labor, because Wesker's ambitions proved to be his undoing, his beginning consuming him, much like his aptly named virus intended to consume the world. Ouroboros, a name which is derived from the self-eating snake of Greek mythology, and in a final climactic battle with his nemesis Chris Redfield in the center of a volcano in the home of the Indapaya, the place that had cultivated the flower which birthed the very virus that Albert sought to unleash, this man-turned-monster met his explosive end. However, the machinations of Albert Wesker were far-reaching, and who knows what the consequences of such a man's influence will be in the years following his demise, or if this was even the true end of Albert Wesker, as a man who cheated death once is certainly liable to do so again. But where things stand now, what is there to say about Albert Wesker? He was a child who was taken from his parents to be a guinea pig in a mad plot to remake the world. A boy whose entire existence encompassed what his masters wished it to be. Throughout the many years of his covert conditioning, Albert proved to be an exceptional individual, and even more so once he'd branched out on his own and began working for himself. In his efforts to quell the persistent unease he felt about his existence, Albert carved a path through the world to reach the man who stood at the center of it, and in the process, an unknown but staggering number of individuals perished as a result. The death and destruction left in the wake of Albert's quest for knowledge would only continue once he'd resolved himself to fulfill the purpose that was set out for him nearly from birth. And if Albert had gotten his way, the world as we know it would have perished as it entered into a new era of primal reckoning, an artificial survival of the fittest that would have ended 99% of our population and altered all organic life on Earth. But with all that we've discussed about Albert's history in mind, did Albert even have a choice in becoming a monster? Was he always destined to be an evil person whose entire life was planned out the moment he was stolen from his parents? Technically, no. Even with all the conditioning he'd undergone, Albert was still his own man, who could have theoretically taken his life in any direction he wanted to. But in actuality, Albert pretty much had no choice in the matter. Again, he did, but it would have been a miracle if he'd managed to go his own way after everything that Oswell and his foundation had done to mold him into their idea of a perfect human being. So as much of a terror that Albert was, there is quite a lot of tragedy in his character, as no infant asked to be torn from their parents, and a child who was raised within the parameters set by the diabolical men who had taken him to fulfill their own goals cannot be totally blamed for what they became once they've matured. Yes, Albert still had to choose to be who he was, and make no mistake, his choices are abhorrent, but his life was one that was molded by darkness, and if Albert hadn't been taken, he would have been a much different person. And well, as anyone could have predicted, if pure evil is where your foundations lie, it's no surprise that when you come out the other side, you reflect everything that they wanted you to be. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Albert? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you liked this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, to my patrons, and to anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.